My paper is on the prevailing perception problems on dispute boards in Africa. The characteristic feature which sets aside DBs from other ADR mechanisms is that DBs are appointed at the commencement of the project. That also gives DBs an advantage of other ADR mechanisms. Because they are familiar with the project, they are able to devise dispute avoidance procedures, so they can avoid disputes from arising in the first place. But because they are also familiar with the project and with the people involved, DBs are able to resolve problems when they arise. This is unlike arbitration or adjudication, where the panel is appointed after the dispute arises. Those of you who are familiar with arbitration know it takes a couple of weeks, even months, to appoint an arbitration panel. But because a DB is already in sight, it's miles ahead in terms of dispute avoidance and dispute resolution. Now, lack of urgency in appointing DBs and in filling occasional voids is sometimes the result of inertia.
It is referred to the president of the UIPE, who then delegates an adjudicator, who should be a member of the UIPE and
have provisions for DBs in the contracts. But somehow, the projects are into their second and third years with no DBs appointed. I am aware of one project which was completed before a DB was appointed. Fortunately, there was no dispute in that project. So my paper is about the perception problems about DBs in Africa, and I'll go to perception problem number 1. Perception problem number 1 is that avoiding DB appointments saves money. Parties believe that avoiding a DB appointment saves money. You have a copy of my paper. If not before you, it's available on the website, I believe. And so I'll not read everything, I'll just highlight a few things. Now, the design and effectiveness of DBs in dispute avoidance and speedy resolution of disputes is grossly undermined if the DBs are not appointed early enough. It is my view that any money not spent due to the absence of a DB is a forced saving compared to the risk and cost of a stalled project or of disputes arising. Perception problem number 2, that members are overpaid. The top rate for remunerating a DB member, as recommended by Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Kenya branch, for its members is from 20 to 25,000 shillings per hour. And that is about US dollars 200 to 280 per hour. It might sound high, but in fact, it compares poorly with what senior professionals in Kenya earn in their primary professions, or what foreigners charge when they are appointed as DB members in Africa. DBs must pay competitive rates in order to attract and also retain skilled practitioners. It is well said, you pay monkeys, no, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So if DBs in Africa pay peanuts, they'll get monkeys. The rates should also reflect the fact that DB members are available at short notice when disputes arise. While annual holidays and occasional long trips can be accommodated, DB members must be available, and people with crowded diaries should excuse themselves from being appointed. Perception problem number 3 is that disputes in large projects are complex. Actually, they are not. In construction industry, whether it's roads, ports, coal plants, geothermal projects, transmission lines, whatever, disputes are generally clustered around just a few issues. For example, costs, delays, interest, compliance with specification, workmanship, extensions of time, etc. The real issues are actually not complicated. Perception problem number 4 is that an individual member's skills deficit is compensated by the multidisciplinary nature of DBs. DBs typically are made up of people from different professions so that they can bring in different skills. But it's necessary that each one of them should be knowledgeable about DBs and be properly trained, because a chain is as strong as its weakest link. Perception problem number 4 is that foreign DB members are more qualified than local professionals. I'm sure you recognize that young man. And my question is he experienced for the job he was born to do? The thing is that he is as experienced in being a king as his mother was the day she became queen. And what I want to bring out here is that while in the West you might have DB members who have got 50 or 100 appointments that they have undertaken, African consultants might not have that number, but that really the lack of large number of appointments is not a major disadvantage. Professionals in Africa might not have a lot of experience as DB members. However, modern recruitment theory places a premium on potential instead of experience. Why? Because people with a lot of experience are also close to retirement or expiry date. One must really work with African engineers and foreign engineers in the same project to appreciate the breadth and depth of African consultants. The specialization of professionals in the West gets them solidly grounded in their fields early and quickly. But the broader experience of professionals in Africa is a great asset in DBs, especially because no one knows at the appointment stage what nature of disputes will arise. You don't know if it will be a legal problem, you don't know if it will be a costing problem, you don't know if it will be an engineering problem. So it helps to have somebody with broad experience. And I'm saying that African consultants, lawyers, engineers, quantity surveyors, valuation surveyors like myself, have got breadth of experience which is also a great asset. Perception problem number 5 is that DBs are too fast. Actually, DBs are very fast because depending on the contract, it might be required for the DB to give a decision within 84 days or fewer days. That is a very fast pace, especially if it's a relatively complicated scenario. Now, governments need to synchronize their response times to DB's timelines. Otherwise, they could be disadvantaged if unmerited claims are not defended in a timely manner, or the DB decisions become final for lack of challenge promptly. Government and quasi-government agencies which simply cannot move fast enough must outsource their work related to DBs in order to safeguard public funds. Perception problem number 6 is that DBs are gate crashers. DBs are treated like intruders or aliens. They are kept in the dark, not invited to site meetings, or briefed on the project. So when the dispute arises, it's like they have lost all the advantages they would have had because of the early appointment. Perception problem number 7 is that DBs are here to create work for themselves, that they foster disputes or encourage disputes in order to get work to do. My experience with DB members and with arbitrators is that they actually try to encourage parties at every stage to resolve disputes amicably. Now, there is need for urgency in addressing the real and perception problems about DBs because of various reasons. Firstly, the new discoveries of oil, gas, coal, minerals, and other resources are already attracting heavy investments and ever larger projects. Then, the rising popularity of PPPs on the continent is also important because the PPPs are bound to generate disputes. Furthermore, this century is the era of timely solutions to problems. But also bear in mind that the Chinese are here. Language issues, cultural conflicts, new work practices, and different presumptions could trigger more misunderstandings in the projects. Africa has previously dealt with Western consultants and contractors, and to some extent Indian contractors, using English as the medium of exchange and with numerous underlying presumptions. Those presumptions can no longer be taken for granted in view of the Chinese presence. I'll now go to the recommendations. One is that DP contracts should be signed at the same time as the main contracts in the project. Indeed, I would suggest that DB members be invited to the ceremonies where the main contracts are signed. That way, DB members would be accepted by the parties as an essential part of the team, which indeed they are. Secondly, the contract should name default DB appointing procedures. I think that is straightforward. The next one is that it should be made the project manager's responsibility to make sure that DBs are in place. The project manager is actually the person ultimately in charge of delivering the project, and it should be in his job description to make sure that DBs are in place and that occasional voids are filled in a timely manner. I would also suggest that payments for DB members should come from the employer and not from the contractor. Then, a DB member should be bound by contract to continue serving in the DB after his resignation until a replacement is found. Of course, the circumstances of the member's resignation should be taken into account. Then the project financiers could also help by making DB appointments a requirement before the first drawdown on the funds. Finally, I have a controversial proposal to make. All team sports have reserves who can enter the field at a moment's notice. If DBs are as important as the practitioners claim, then projects beyond certain monetary limits should have at least one standby DB member, probably appointed by the parties directly or through a default appointment mechanism. The role of the reserve member would be to replace any active member either on ad hoc basis, like a site visit, or on permanent basis if one DB member is unable to proceed for whatever reason. The remuneration of the reserve would be minimal until he or she actually performs specific tasks or becomes a regular member of the DB. The writer invites this innovation and to remember, if it is ever adopted in future, that they first heard about it in Nairobi, the city in the sun. Thank you.